Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unlocking a hidden story inside one of the most famous poems ever written. And I'll warn you, it might just change how you read it forever. For about a century now, we've heard these iconic lines from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and thought one thing: World War I, a world completely shattered by war. And for good reason, right? All the critics saw its fragmented style, its images of death and decay, and saw a direct line to the trenches, to the collapse of European culture, to all that angst that followed the Great War. A catastrophe that killed up to 100 million people. Yeah, you heard that right, far more than the war itself. And yet somehow it's just vanished from our cultural memory. So how do we even start to unravel this literary mystery? Well, first we kind of have to understand this bigger question. Why is one global trauma remembered with monuments and ceremonies, while another one just gets erased? Well, think about it. War has a narrative we can wrap our heads around. It's about heroes and nations and sacrifice. You can build memorials to that. But a pandemic? That's different. It's an invisible, personal fight. It's a lonely battle inside your own body. And that's exactly what literary scholar Elizabeth Outka is getting at. There's no heroic story here. Dying from the flu wasn't seen as a noble sacrifice. It was just a tragedy. And that makes it incredibly hard for a whole society to remember it together. It becomes a cultural ghost. Okay, so if the pandemic was so culturally invisible, how on earth can we connect it to Eliot and his masterpiece? Well, the clues, it turns out, were hiding in plain sight all along, right in his personal letters. And this timeline is just so revealing. Eliot wasn't some distant observer. He and his wife actually caught the virus in December 1918, right in the middle of the second deadliest wave. He was living it, he was breathing it, at the very moment he was dreaming up this poem. He wrote about it all the time, this constant presence of illness. He even talked about the long epidemic of domestic influenza. So for him, the sickness wasn't just in the world, it was in his house, and it was in his head. All that strain led to a complete nervous breakdown in 1921. So we've got the context, we know about Eliot's personal trauma, but did any of that actually make it into the poem? Well, let's look at the text, because it seems like the trauma is coded right into it, almost like a secret language. You know the poem's strange, disjointed style, right? The way it jumps all over the place with all these different voices. For years, critics just called it modernist fragmentation. But what if it's not just some artsy choice? What if it's what some scholars now call delirium logic, the actual feeling of a terrifying, disorienting high fever? When you read a line like this, burning, 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 it's easy to think it's about spiritual angst or whatever, but read through this new lens and you feel it. It's the raw physical sensation of a body literally on fire with fever. Or this one, this is just haunting. It perfectly captures one of the most awful symptoms of the flu, this overwhelming, maddening thirst and dehydration. The mind is so delirious, it hallucinates the very sound of the water it needs, but just cannot have. And the whole poem is just saturated with this feeling of complete exhaustion. There was actually a medical term for it back then, innervation. It's that deep, bone-weary weakness that flu survivors talked about for months, this draining of not just physical energy, but mental and even moral strength. So beyond the physical symptoms, the poem also works as a kind of memorial to the pandemic's devastating aftermath. You see a world just filled with death and this really strange, unspeakable silence. When we read about bones and dead bodies in the poem, our minds automatically jump to soldiers in the trenches, right? But put on these pandemic glasses for a second. Suddenly, these images become the civilian corpses that were flooding the cities and homes, the ones that overwhelmed the undertakers and filled mass graves. And that's when the poem's obsession with broken communication and not being able to connect suddenly makes so much sense. It's capturing a massive collective trauma that society literally had no words for. A pain so huge it became hidden in plain sight. So what's the big takeaway here? Why does seeing this hidden layer in a 100-year-old poem really matter to us today? Well, this pandemic lens doesn't erase the other interpretations about the war, not at all. It just adds this deeply personal and physical dimension to the poem's famous brokenness. It shows us a world that was shattered not just by bombs, but by an invisible virus. You could say he captured the ghost of the pandemic, He took all that invisible suffering and somehow translated it into language in a way that his generation felt was deeply true, even if they couldn't exactly say why. They got it because they had lived through it too. And that leaves us with a really fascinating thought, doesn't it? Just like Eliot encoded the 1918 flu into his masterpiece, the art being made right now is silently recording the anxieties and traumas of our time, just waiting for future generations to come along and decode its secrets.